Case of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. A vengeful ex-partner's sudden return can be petrifying, with the possibility of violence looming. On a seemingly ordinary day, a couple's joyous outing turned tragic as gunshots rang out, leaving them lifeless on the ground. A few people were killed in a parking lot near the church. There was outrage and panic as parishioners heard gunshots, but did not see the full horror. Police arrived and examined the scene, finding 2 victims, a young married couple. We'll start by examining the lives of our heroes and delving into the details of the situation they found themselves in. We'll also discuss whether their tragic end could have been avoided. When lies, betrayal, greed, fear, and darkness become an integral part of someone's mindset, it drives them to commit unthinkable crimes. In fact, an entire family can be drawn into such crimes, causing the collapse of many lives. The brutal double murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. Nathan was a father who had moved closer to his daughter to be near her. However, he had to obtain official custody and legal visitation rights with the help of a lawyer during this difficult period. It was during this time that he met Crystal, a childhood friend. Crystal had dreamed of graduating from university, but instead got married and had a family with 4 children. When the marriage ended in divorce, Crystal and her children returned to their hometown. Nathan and Crystal met at a time that was ideal for both of them. Nathan was drawn to Crystal's children and her positive outlook. They got married in 2013, with Nathan working in a warehouse and Crystal starting a thriving clothing and jewelry business. The family prospered and they were able to hire a lawyer to assist Nathan in obtaining visitation rights with his daughter from a previous relationship. The daughter, Madison, was excited about her father's new wife and siblings. However, Madison's maternal grandparents, Lita and Paula Westfall, were resentful and worried about losing their only grandchild. In 2012, Kristen Westfall, Madison's mother, had applied for full custody with the support of her parents. The custody battle continued for 2 years, but Crystal's arrival in Nathan's life altered the entire situation. The judge granted Nathan visitation rights in October 2013. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal arrived at a church service, planning to take their 6-year-old daughter Madison for a walk afterwards to retrieve pre-prepared gifts. As they left the church, but they were shot and killed in a brutal execution-style attack. The investigation revealed that Nathan had been shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle and also in the thigh with a .20 gauge shotgun, suggesting the involvement of 2 shooters. The investigators were surprised by the reaction of Nathan's ex-wife's family, the Westfalls, who seemed to be overly dramatizing the tragedy while concealing their satisfaction over the deaths that had occurred. Paul Westfall even went into a seizure, seemingly unable to accept the news of Nathan's death. A grown man who had spent years trying to remove Nathan's influence from his daughter's life was so distraught that he had a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview came across as a little unsettling. She was the only member of the family who maintained a very composed and natural demeanor, despite the fact that she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child together. Kristen continued to provide some rather peculiar details about him, seemingly trying to emphasize only the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She reported that she knew who killed him in Montana. Nathan was listed in dangerous motorcycle gangs, and one day, one of the gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. This story checked out, but it remained an empty threat because of an accidentally broken motorcycle, and the gang itself turned out to be a common exaggeration to confuse the investigation. As an alibi, Kristen said that on the day of the crime, she was at the grocery store with her father Paul, a couple of miles from the church, after which they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed their presence at the grocery store. Paul Westfall told the exact same story, but Paul was a hunter and had a firearm in his arsenal, so his hands were tested for traces of gunpowder, but the result was negative. However, until now, his reaction to the death of Nathan, whom he sincerely hated and never hid, seemed to the investigators very strange, and played it left a sliver of doubt in his sincerity. Interviews with loved ones over a short period of time helped investigators discover that Nathan Maddox was involved in a custody battle over his daughter with his ex-wife, Kristen Westfall, and her family. After a long and bitter dispute in court, he was close to retaining custody, something that none of the Westphal family members strongly wanted. Such a desperate battle between the parties may well have been cause for reprisal, but the police had no concrete evidence to arrest any member of the Westphal family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 people were the shooters. Investigators had yet to be convinced of their story and figure out which family member pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 2 people or whether a hired killer did it. The researchers took a different approach and decided to act through the main protagonist of the controversy, little Madison Maddox. After all, her safety was at stake since she was still with the family. That could pose a threat to her. The police, along with Child Protective Services, CPS, went to remove the child from the home, but they faced a wave of protests and outrage. The behavior of the older Westphal family entailed a search of the home. What the police later found in the house shocked them. A gun was stored on a shelf in an easily accessible place in the room, and the culmination of the search was the illegal drugs scattered around the house. It turns out that in 2013, Kristen Westphal was charged and arrested for possession of a controlled substance. The arrests were repeated, which clearly indicated that Kristen couldn't be a good mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were granted temporary custody of their daughter and would not allow Nathan to see her, while their granddaughter was in their custody. However, despite Child Protective Services prohibitions, continued to live in the house with her young daughter in the same room and slept in the same bed with her, even in 2014 with the injunctions in place. After a search of the Westphals' home, where a used syringe with residue of illegal substances was found on a dresser and a gun on the nightstand next to Kristen's bed, little Madison was taken into temporary custody and additional evidence found led to the Westphals' arrest. State authorities wanted the girl placed in foster care and said they found supplies for illegal drugs in the Westphals' home, as well as a gun on a nightstand within easy reach of the girl. Child Protective Services was involved in the Madison Maddox custody case in March 2014, less than 2 months after the tragic murder outside the church. Authorities made 4 arrests. Kristen Westphal, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and her parents, Paul and Lita Westphal, were arrested. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in the Maddox murder, and cross-examinations didn't produce the desired result either. The police used some deceptive tactics to put pressure on the most vulnerable member of the Westphal family, 18-year-old Cameron. He was told that if found guilty, all his family members would be sentenced to life in prison, while the direct perpetrators would face the death penalty. Cameron, being young compassionate, became very afraid and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, disclosing all the details of the incident. The crime against the young couple, the Maddoxes, turned out to be a carefully pre-planned attack by the Westphal family gang. Their motive was to permanently exclude Nathan from the role of father. Shortly after the shooting incident, it was revealed that Nathan and his ex-wife, Kristen, had been engaged in a nasty custody dispute over their 5-year-old daughter Madison, with Kristen's family supporting her. The prolonged and expensive legal battle was expected to end favorably for Nathan. However, the Westphals were concerned about this outcome and meticulously plotted a scheme to remove him from Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter alone, but the Westphals were not interested in letting her go, even to see her father, let alone give him the girl permanently. The Westphals were very hurt by the fact that the former son-in-law had settled down in life and was living a good life. Thus, when the judge allowed him multiple visitations, it became obvious that he could win the trial, which led Kristen to come up with an original idea to get rid of him once and for all. Kristen initially attempted to find someone to kill her ex-husband, but when that plan failed, she and her father decided to take matters into their own hands. On a typical Sunday, the family attended church, and January 18th was no different. Lita Westphal, accompanied by young Madison, arrived at the scheduled service time. Afterward, Lita had to hand the girl over to her father. Meanwhile, Kristen and Paul went to a remote store, where they posed as customers to be captured on CCTV cameras, aiming to establish a solid alibi. However, they misjudged the timing. Each family member had their own responsible role to play for the entire interval. They communicated by text message, updating each other on the Maddox's movements. Letha, who had attended the service, informed Paul as Nathan and Crystal prepared to leave the church. She also called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron took an active role in concealing the evidence. He discarded the gun used after his sister and father shot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake, where he discarded the bag of weapons. Cameron soon agreed to cooperate with authorities and revealed that Kristen originally came up with the idea and the family went along. He also pointed out to investigators the location where he had discarded the murder weapons, which divers later retrieved, confirming Cameron's words. The police detained 29-year-old Kristen, her brother Cameron, and her parents Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Thus, and Paul pulled the trigger, with Cameron and Lita acting as willing accomplices. Given that Lita was at the church at the time of the incident, it was obvious that she was not responsible for the shots that killed Nathan and Crystal Maddox. However, phone records showed that she was responsible for informing her daughter and spouse of the couple's whereabouts as they left the church, while Kristen and Paul were the ones who fired the bullets. Lita and her son Cameron participated in the crime intentionally. The trial was very loud and lengthy, with each member of the Westfall family tried separately. Paul Westfall continued to exhibit seizure-like behavior, so he was found mentally unfit and remained in a state psychiatric hospital for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge found Paul incompetent. That verdict was overturned 4 months later. With Paul and Letha facing the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Crystal Maddox, they had little choice but to agree to a plea bargain with the district attorney's office to avoid the death penalty. Paul pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Letha also pleaded guilty to participating in organized criminal activity instead of going to trial. Letha will not be eligible for parole until 2046 and is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, but will be eligible for parole in 2044. Kristen is the third member of the Westfall family to stand trial in this case. Throughout the entire court hearing, Kristen pleaded not guilty to all the accusations against her, stating that her whole family was crazy and she was the only one who was sincere about it. When her entire family, Letha, Paul, Pia, and Cameron, came to the trial and testified against her, she couldn't say anything to their faces. In August 2016, the final trial and sentencing for Kristen Westfall began. The motive for killing Nathan and Crystal Maddox was the custody of their daughter, Madison Maddox. Kristen adamantly did not want Nathan to see Maddie whenever he wanted, as she wanted to control her daughter and father's communication herself and through the child. The trial took over a week, and with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury found her guilty of capital murder after 8 hours of deliberation. Kristen Westfall was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received an identical sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westfall is currently incarcerated at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas. While Paul, Letha, and Kristen Westfall were ultimately charged with 2 counts of murder, officials only charged the youngest member of the family, Cameron, with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron Westfall pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree tampering with evidence, and the judge deferred sentencing contingent upon Cameron testifying against his family. Cameron faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. It was reported that he had nothing to do with the actual shooting and that his mother was also not involved because she was at the church when the crime occurred. However, phone records show that she texted her husband and daughter as the Maddoxes were preparing to go home. Currently, Cameron is incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, where he is expected to remain until his expected release date in 2025. Cameron was very indifferent to the crime and claimed he had nothing to do with it. But the investigation didn't rule out the possibility that he knew more than he was saying, as he lived in the house with his family and couldn't have not heard about Kristen and Paul's plans to kill the Maddox family. Her entire family, her brother Cameron and her parents Lloyd Paul and Lita Westfall, were involved in the crime. This case was complicated as the community demanded justice. Lloyd Paul, Lita, and Cameron Westfall made a deal with the investigation after agreeing to testify against the sister. Cameron took a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence the following year. A judge also sentenced Lloyd Paul to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to first-degree murder under the plea agreement and would not be able to appeal the sentence. The crime family's protagonist, Kristen Westphal, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole in a fateful decision. The victim's daughter, Maddox, lost her father and will likely never see the grandparents who cared for her and perhaps even loved her. After the Westphal family was sentenced, the legal battle for custody of Maddox continues. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, has since filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. The people in the town were devout, went to church, and they also easily killed people, covering themselves with concern for the girl. The older generation of Westphal fulfilled the wish of their daughter and helped to commit this terrible crime. Nathan was not a bad or mean person. He loved his own daughter and strove to be a good father to her. Obviously, in addition to the custody battle, the hatred associated with the fact that the girl's father had created a new family and was able to pick up his mind and start a new life without crime comes first, and was perfectly happy with the new woman, having something he didn't have in his past relationship with Kristen. That's what was causing all the negativity from the ex-wife, and she was able to turn her entire family against him. If it was just about custody, they wouldn't have killed Nathan's new woman. After all, the Madison custody dispute started before Nathan and Crystal's relationship. There is certainly only one loser in the history of the Westphal versus Maddox fight. Of course, it's Madison. I'd like to believe that when she grows up, she won't remember the wild selfishness with which adults tried to take advantage of her by saying words about love. After all, if the family had loved the child, they would have tried to build a normal relationship for her sake, but they were only acting to please their own egos. As expensive as they come, neighborhoods rarely get more expensive as the famous Beverly Hills. Located in downtown Los Angeles, Beverly Hills is one of the most expensive zip codes in the United States. The average household here earns well over $200,000 per year. It is one of the most expensive cities in the USA. Most of the residents of this historic city were top celebrities and accomplished professionals from all walks of life. But it was here in this affluent part of the world that a chilly murder occurred in 2000. Susan Jane Berman was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA to David Berman and Betty Ewald on May 18, 1945. Susan's father, David Berman, was a major player in the Jewish American gang on the Las Vegas Strip. He ran the popular Flamingo Hotel in the early bloom days of the Vegas Strip. He was commonly referred to as Dave the Jew. David gave Susan everything she ever needed. Well, maybe not exactly everything. Susan grew up in the Vegas Strip and would return to the Strip from school every day to do her homework, counting the chips at the casino to practice her math. While this wasn't the routine for most kids, it looked like she would have a perfect life. But tragedy struck at the tender age of 12. David Berman reportedly died from a heart attack during a routine surgery to remove polyps from his colon. The circumstances surrounding her father's death were both mysterious, controversial, and consequential, as this particular event would change the life of 12-year-old Susan forever. This double tragedy meant Susan had to leave Vegas. Susan's uncle Charles, Chicky Berman, took her to live with him and his family in Lewiston, Idaho. It was at a junior high school in Lewiston that an English and a history teacher discovered Susan's unmistakable talent for writing and inspired her to pursue a career in writing. Susan subsequently enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, to study sociology. During her final year, she met a graduate student who would become her best friend for life, Robert Allen Durst. Robert, or Bobby Durst, as was his nickname, was at UCLA for a one-year master's program. Both students came from privileged backgrounds, and it seemed like they clicked almost instantly. Beyond a privileged background, Susan shared something else in common with her newfound friend. Both Susan and Robert had lost both their mothers at a young age. In 1969, Susan eventually went on to get a master's degree in journalism at the University of California, Berkeley. Susan was a part of a selection of 30 students for the graduate program in journalism at UC Berkeley. According to Elizabeth Moran, one of her classmates who became a national correspondent at the LA Times, Susan was simply exceptional. Of the select 30, none was short of talent and wits, but the aura of Susan made her stand out. She could engage any kind of audience and keep them hooked. Susan had all the ingredients to become a successful journalist, at least according to her classmates. That would prove to be true. Just 2 years after her graduation, she landed a job at the popular newspaper, San Francisco Examiner. She also wrote the famous 1971 college guidebook, The Underground Guide to the College of Your Choice. In the early 80s, Susan moved to New York, where she wrote for the New York Magazine, Cosmopolitan, and Family Circle. In New York, Susan met James Brady, an investigative reporter. James and Susan became friends as she began working on writing a memoir about her late father. Susan requested the criminal records and investigative reports about her father from the FBI and the Department of Justice. She was left stunned to see her father, David, had been linked to gangland violence, mob crimes, and several murders, many of which she and her mother were completely oblivious about. Her 1981 book, Easy Street, The True Story of a Mob Family, eventually became one of her most significant works, where she detailed her life as the daughter of a mobster. The book was such a success that Hollywood producers became interested in adapting the book into a movie. The movie rights were sold for $350,000. The book party was held at Sammy's Romanian Steakhouse on Manhattan's Lower East Side. The book party was hosted by Susan's ever-present best friend, Robert Durst. Susan would later get married to her heartthrob Christopher Margulies at the Hotel Bel Air in LA. Again, her ever-present best friend, Robert Durst, walked her down the aisle. In 1986, just 2 years after their marriage, Susan would lose the love of her life. Christopher Margulies died of a heroin overdose. By the mid-90s, Susan moved to West Hollywood. The 50-year-old writer was at the peak of her powers and had just been nominated for a Writers Guild of America award. In the late 90s, Susan moved to a rented apartment in Benedict Canyon, one of the main thoroughfares from West Hollywood to the Valley area. It was just 2 miles away from Rodeo Drive, one of the most expensive streets on the planet. Susan was one of the top journalists in the area. She had just begun working on a project titled Sin City for Showtime TV. The project was reportedly Showtime's response to HBO's well-acclaimed TV series, The Sopranos. For Susan, this was the ideal neighborhood. No one knew Susan's biggest project yet would never hit the screens. After Susan moved to Benedict Canyon, she focused more on her upcoming work for Showtime. On December 19, 2000, a few days before Christmas, Susan Berman got on a call with her actress friend, Kim Langford. It was the first time in several years that Susan and Kim were not spending the holidays together. That call was quite unusual, and Susan seemed worried. The conversation that ensued scared Kim. Susan seemed to have some information that could change a lot of things. Kim was curious to know what this information was, but Susan didn't have it herself. But Susan assured Kim she knew where to get this information. Although Kim feared for her friend's life, Susan was a well-renowned journalist. So Kim presumed this big information was about one of her upcoming big projects. No one knew what exactly this big information was. At 1 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 2000, LA police received a call to Susan's home on 1527 Benedict Canyon Road. Her neighbors had become worried when one of her dogs was seen barking and running around loose. This came as a surprise since Susan loved her fox terriers and would never leave them unattended. Police arrived at the scene to find Susan's body murdered in cold blood, execution style with a 9mm handgun. She was shot to the back of the head with a single bullet, and it was estimated that she had been dead for at least 1 day. Kim's fears were confirmed. Susan was dead. Trailing Susan's killer was not going to be easy. Her killer had at least a 1-day head start since the body was found a day late. Police found Susan's body lying on the guest room floor, dressed in sweats and a t-shirt, with only one shell casing lying next to her body. The front door was unlocked and a rear door was found ajar. Nothing was stolen. Police knew they were dealing with someone who had known the victim, as there was no sign of a forced entry and there were no defensive wounds found on Susan's body. The motive for her gruesome murder remained unclear. The media began to drive the narrative that the murder was gang-related since Susan's father, David, had been a gangster and she had been killed execution style. But the police noted that most of her father's associates and rivals were already dead, while Susan wrote a memoir about her father ruling out the possibility of a gang-related murder. The first major lead in the case came sooner than investigators expected. Just 2 days after Susan's death, this major lead, though, was shrouded in mystery. The Beverly Hills Police Department received a mysterious anonymous letter mailed to their office. The letter only contained Susan's address, 1527 Benedict Canyon, and a green pen on a white piece of paper with the word cadaver. Clearly, someone didn't want Susan's body lying on the floor for long. Police observed that there was a typographical error made by the writer of the letter with the incorrect spelling of Beverly as Beverly. Although this seemed insignificant at first, little did they know that this minute detail would rather prove to be a crucial piece of evidence aiding the investigators in their relentless pursuit to apprehend the perpetrator. Even though the police found Susan's body only a day after her death, her killer would not be found so soon. It would take 14 long years, a rather painful wait for the friends and family of Susan Berman. To end this wait, they had to find out who wrote this mystery note. Was it the killer, or was it a witness? Investigators had to piece together a complex puzzle to catch the culprit. Susan was reportedly going to be questioned by the LAPD at the time of her death in connection with the disappearance of Catherine Durst, her best friend's wife who had gone missing without a trace. Like in many cases of disappearance of a spouse, their partner was considered the prime suspect. Upon further investigation, Robert Durst could not be eliminated as a suspect in the disappearance of his wife, Catherine, and neither could he be charged. All the evidence linking him to her disappearance was merely circumstantial. Since Susan was scheduled to be interviewed by police about what she knew of Robert Durst's possible involvement in the disappearance of his wife, police suspected Robert may have been involved in killing Susan to silence her, but there was no concrete evidence. After 15 years of this very twisted cold case, no one, not even investigators, could have imagined where the first big break would have come from. In the years following Susan Berman's death, Robert, the prime suspect in both cases, was villainized by the press. In an effort to exonerate himself from both unsolved cases, he worked with filmmaker Andrew Jarecki on the documentary The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. The documentary featured 3 of Robert's most prominent alleged criminal activities: the 1982 disappearance of his wife, Catherine Durst, the 2000 point-blank execution of his best friend, Susan Berman, the 2001 death and dismemberment of Robert's neighbor, Morris Black. Robert had claimed self-defense in the murder of Morris Black and was acquitted at the trial. The uncanny and wiggly Robert Allen Durst was born in New York on April 12, 1943 to Seymour Durst and Bernice Herstein. Robert Durst was the first son of a real estate mogul and the heir to the Durst family empire. When Robert was just 7, he claimed to have witnessed his mother, Bernice, jumping off the edge of the roof of their family home. Most investigators say her death was an accident, and the family acknowledged that Bernice took her own life. In a March 2015 interview with the New York Times, Robert's brother Douglas Durst claimed no one witnessed the event. Why Robert claims to have witnessed his mother's death remains unclear. This conflicting report was just one of many blows and counter-blows of a fearsome sibling rivalry like no other. At age 10, Robert visited his psychiatrist to counsel him on this newfound sibling rivalry. The psychiatrist reported that Robert had personality decomposition and schizophrenia. He attended the Scarsdale High School, where his classmates described him as a loner. He obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from Lehigh University in 1965. Later that year, he met Susan Berman at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, where he enrolled in a doctoral program but eventually withdrew from the school and returned to New York in 1969. At this time, had no interest in his father's company, Durst Organization. He preferred to start something of his own. So between 1970 and 1971, he opened a small health food store in Vermont. In 1970, Robert met Catherine McCormick, a dental hygienist, and in January 1972, the pair began living together in Vermont. In 1973, on the advice of Robert's father, they returned to New York so Robert could work with the Durst Organization. And on April 12, 1973, on Robert's 30th birthday, he officially got married to Catherine. Although to many friends of the couple, they appeared to have a fairy tale life. A closer look at their lives in the weeks leading to Catherine's disappearance shows there was more to it than meets the eye. A few weeks before her death, many signs pointed to foul play. Catherine had been treated for facial bruises inflicted on her by Robert just 3 weeks before her disappearance at Jacob Medical Center in the Bronx. She never pressed charges. A few weeks before her mysterious disappearance, she had asked Robert for a $250,000 divorce settlement. Robert was not interested in parting with so much money, and instead offered $100,000 to Catherine. Before Catherine could review the offer, Robert had grown impatient. He canceled his wife's credit card, removed her name from their joint account, and stopped paying her tuition fees at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He also reduced his divorce payout offer to $15,000. On January 31, 1982, a few months before she earned her degree in pediatrics from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York City, Catherine Durst simply disappeared into thin air. Catherine was last seen at a dinner party organized by her friend Gilbert Nojami in Newtown, Connecticut on the eve of January 31st. Catherine and Robert were known to have fought that evening. Catherine's cottage was found ransacked shortly after she was declared missing, and 3 weeks after her disappearance, police found her possessions in the building's garbage compactor. Catherine was declared legally dead in 2017. But her disappearance and the exact circumstances remain a mystery even to this day. Months before Susan was killed, the NYPD had been asked to reopen the investigation into the disappearance of Catherine at the request of Westchester County District Attorney Jeanine Pirro. The investigation was publicized, and friends urged investigators to contact Susan Berman for an interview, since she was close to Robert. Susan Berman had managed Robert Durst with the media after the disappearance of his wife. She reportedly knew much about the disappearance. While his wife's disappearance remained a mystery, and his involvement in Susan's death a mere suspicion, Robert's next act was more clear-cut. On October 9, 2001, was arrested in connection with the death of his elderly neighbor Morris Black. Morris' body parts were found dismembered, floating in Galveston Bay in Texas. After being released on bail amounting to $250,000, he failed to appear for a court hearing, scheduled on October 16th, resulting in a warrant being issued for his arrest due to bail jumping. Then, on November 30th, Durst was apprehended at a Wegmans supermarket in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where he had attempted to shoplift Band-Aids, a newspaper, and a chicken salad sandwich. Some suspicious items were found in his rental car when he was apprehended: $37,000 in cash, 2 guns, marijuana, Black's driver's license, and directions to Gilbert Najami's home in Connecticut. While evading authorities, Durst disturbingly used his time to stalk his own brother, Douglas, even going so far to visit the driveway of his residence in Katona, New York, while armed. He was eventually extradited to Texas for trial. In 2003, Robert Durst stood trial for the murder of Morris Black. His defense attorney, Dick DeGuerin, argued Robert had acted in self-defense and the weapons discharged as they both struggled when Morris threatened him with a .22 caliber pistol. Robert admitted to having dismembered Morris's body with a knife, saw, and axe before dumping his remains in Galveston Bay. Since Morris's head was never found, Robert's claim of a struggle and location of the gunshot wound could not be confirmed or dismissed. On November 11, 2003, the jury acquitted Robert Durst for lack of forensics to prove capital murder. He, however, received a 5-year sentence for tampering with evidence and jumping bail. He was paroled in July 2005. The terms of Robert Durst's parole required him to stay near his home and seek authorization before making any trip. Robert Durst made an unauthorized trip back to the crime scene, where he had killed Morris Black. On his defiant crime tour, he ran into an unexpected familiar face: Galveston County District Court Judge Susan Criss, who had presided over his murder trial. They were both shocked to see each other. With this unauthorized trip, Robert Durst violated his parole terms and was returned to prison. He was then released in March 2006. Robert was naturally the heir of the Durst organization, but in 1992, his father decided to pick his younger brother Douglas Durst to take over the Durst organization, another stern choice in the already heated sibling rivalry. His father said that his choice of Douglas was due to Robert's inappropriate conduct, but Robert was having none of that. He believed he was the rightful heir to the Durst organization, and after returning from prison, he decided to sue his family. The lengthy lawsuit finally ended in 2006, and Robert Durst was bought out for a one-time payment of $65 million. This lawsuit brought a more tumultuous twist to the relationship between Durst and his family. The jinx was supposed to clear the air, but it turned out to be an actual jinx for Robert. During the filming of The Jinx, Susan Berman's stepson, Sareb Kaufman, uncovered a letter Robert had written to Susan in 1999, a few months before her death. The typographical error was the same in both Robert's letter and the anonymous letter sent to the police. The handwriting was almost indistinguishable. When the director of The Jinx, Jarecki, saw the letter, he showed Robert Durst the spelling of the word Beverly from both letters, and asked which one Robert didn't write, but the enigmatic millionaire could tell, and was rather left stunned. On March 14, 2015, a day before the airing of the final episode of the HBO series, The Jinx, Robert Durst was arrested by the FBI in New Orleans and charged with the first-degree murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. Robert made a few checks to his voicemail box, enabling investigators to trace his location. He remained stunned. Investigators were able to trace him to the Canal Street Marriott, having checked in with the false name Everett Ward. A fake Texas ID was also found, a .38 caliber loaded revolver, a new phone, a flesh-tone latex mask, maps of Louisiana, Florida, and Cuba, and over $200,000 in cash were found with Robert. According to bank transactions, he had withdrawn over $315,000 in the last 5 to 6 weeks. Investigators speculate he was planning to flee to Cuba since they have no extradition treaty with the U.S. After a lifetime of circumventing the law, Robert Durst would finally come face to face with justice. Robert Durst initially received an 85-month sentence for his firearm charges while he awaited trial in the Susan Berman case. The trial was delayed due to Robert undergoing surgery and the prosecutors seeking more evidence to finally put the elusive killer behind bars. In October 2018, Judge Mark Wyndham of the Los Angeles County Superior Court finally decided there was enough evidence to charge Robert Durst with the murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. On March 2, 2020, after much delay, Robert Durst finally appeared in court to begin his trial. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the trial was postponed to May 17, 2021. During the trial, Robert's defense team asked for a mistrial and a halt to the trial at least 3 times due to Robert's ailing medical condition. The jury decided to proceed with the trial each time. Robert Durst was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Susan Berman. On October 14, 2021, was finally sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was incarcerated at the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. On November 1, 2021, after almost 40 long years, a New York grand jury finally indicted Robert Durst for the murder of his wife, but he would never stand trial. On January 10, 2022, Robert died of cardiac arrest just 3 months after his sentencing, aged 78. After Robert's sentence was read, one of Susan Berman's cousins, David Berman, said he'd visited Susan Berman's grave and told her she could rest easy, that justice has been done. Ellen Strauss, a friend of Catherine Durst, was happy that Susan's family would finally get justice, but then hoped that Catherine would get justice too before Robert died. According to California law, Robert Durst's death renders moot the murder charge filed against him for the death of his wife. Douglas Durst said this of his brother Robert's death: "Bob lived a sad, painful, and tragic life. We hope that his death brings some closure to those he hurt." Robert Durst had diverted justice through elaborate schemes crafted to hide his heinous crimes. His final installment in his crafty scheme served to reveal how he betrayed his wife, best friend, and neighbor. Case of Emmett Corrigan. Ashley Harmon was a vibrant and intelligent person who experienced a challenging time when her parents divorced at the age of 9. During this period, she took on a maternal role, caring for her 5 siblings and protecting them. Ashley's faith was the cornerstone of her life. As a devout Mormon and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, she turned to her faith in God for strength and comfort during difficult times. Her unwavering belief provided her with a sense of peace, resilience, and determination, enabling her to overcome obstacles and face challenges with courage. In 2003, while studying human development at Utah State, Ashley met Emmett, a philosophy student. Emmett, like Ashley, had experienced the pain of his parents' divorce at a young age. However, he found solace in the Mormon faith and was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints at 17. Ashley was immediately drawn to Emmett's charm, and he reciprocated her feelings. Emmett was immediately smitten with Ashley's intelligence when they first met, and he quickly realized she was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. He confided in his closest friends about his feelings, and their relationship blossomed over the next few months. During Christmas in 2008, Emmett proposed to Ashley, and to his delight, she accepted. The couple tied the knot in a Mormon temple, surrounded by their shared values and beliefs. The ceremony was a beautiful expression of their commitment to each other and their faith. As newlyweds, Emmett and Ashley were filled with joy and excitement as they began their new life together. Their marriage was built on a foundation of stability and happiness, which is deeply rooted in Mormon values. In the Mormon faith, marriage is considered a sacred and eternal bond that transcends mortal life. While divorce is not entirely ruled out, it is strongly discouraged and only permitted under specific extreme circumstances. In 2005, Ashley and Emmett had twin daughters, and they were thrilled to start their journey as parents. Emmett loved being a father and cherished every moment with his girls. Ashley was happy to be living the life she always wanted. At the time, they were college students at Utah State University, and they managed to balance school with taking care of their babies. Although they faced challenges, their faith and love for each other helped them overcome difficulties. With determination, they pushed through and worked towards a better future. In 2009, Emmett graduated from Utah State University with high honors, went to law school and passed the bar exam, becoming a bankruptcy attorney. During this time, Ashley stayed at home to care for their growing family, while Emmett focused on building his career. Ashley Corgan took on the role of managing the household and raising their 4 young children. To outsiders, the Corgan family appeared to have a perfect life, a beautiful home, multiple kids, and a fulfilling career for Emmett. But beneath the surface, things were different. In August 2010, Emmett began to feel overwhelmed by the financial burden of providing for his family of 6. To remedy this, Emmett decided to start his own business, a criminal defense firm. Through a friend, he met Candy Hall, a reputable paralegal with experience in criminal law. The two met for lunch and got along well, leading Emmett to hire her for his firm. Candy was married to Robert Hall, a hard worker and devoted father. When Candy landed the job at Emmett's firm, she was initially thrilled, and her husband and children were happy for her. As the stress of building a business and raising their large family took its toll, Ashley noticed a change in her marriage to Emmett. He was overwhelmed by his responsibilities and sought a release by spending excessive time at the gym, often at inconvenient times that left Ashley to care for their 4 children alone. Despite their growing distance, Ashley and Emmett welcomed their 5th child, a son, on January 15, 2011. However, Emmett's behavior was different from when their other children were born. He began spending more and more time away from home, sometimes staying out overnight. Ashley confided in her sister, expressing her genuine concern that Emmett's activities might be evidence of infidelity. Emmett's assistant, Candy Hall, was facing marital problems similar to Ashley's. Candy confided in a friend that her husband Rob was jealous of her working for the charming Emmett. The constant arguing was putting a strain on their relationship. On March 6, 2011, Ashley and Emmett celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary, but Emmett didn't join her. Instead, he claimed to be at a bodybuilding competition, leaving Ashley to take care of their children by herself. Ashley felt anxious about her marriage, wondering if she was to blame for Emmett's unhappiness. Since divorce wasn't an option, she decided to work on improving their relationship. With a fresh resolve on March 11th, Ashley aimed to restore unity to her home. Ashley was determined to repair her strained relationship with her husband Emmett. She spent the entire day planning a perfect evening, attending to every detail to make it special. She cooked his favorite meal, tidied the house, and reminded the children to be on their best behavior. Ashley set the table and waited for Emmett to arrive home from work at 6 p.m. However, he walked in 2 hours late. When she tried to greet him with a kiss, he turned away, leaving her feeling cold. Despite his aloofness and the growing distance between them, Ashley was resolute in her mission to rekindle Emmett's love for her. She firmly believed that their love was worth fighting for, and was willing to do whatever it took to salvage their relationship. 2 hours after she had finished preparing dinner, the family finally gathered around the table to eat. But to Ashley's dismay, Emmett claimed he wasn't hungry. Ashley prepared a meal for her husband Emmett, but he showed little interest, leaving her disappointed and hurt. When he claimed he needed to go to Walgreens, Ashley sensed something was wrong and asked him to stay and talk. Emmett responded harshly and left, leaving Ashley confused and hurt. Meanwhile, Emmett's assistant, Candy, was going through a tough time in her marriage to Rob Hall. That same day, Rob decided to pack his bags and leave their home, marking the end of their relationship. Rob had a strong bond with his loved ones, but he needed space. One evening, Rob asked his daughter if she'd borrowed his ex-wife Candy's car. She said no. Later, she drove past Walgreens, saw Candy's car, and called her dad to let him know. Rob's casual response hit a profound impact on two families. Ashley lay awake in bed, her heart filled with worry as she prayed for her marriage to succeed. Despite her efforts to reach him, Emmett wasn't responding to her texts and calls, causing her great unease. Her instincts told her something was wrong, and she felt a sense of dread. Meanwhile, at around 1 p.m., a 911 call reported gunshots and a screaming woman in the Walgreens parking lot. The police responded quickly, unsure of what they would find. They didn't know if it was a random shooting, a botched drug deal, a robbery, or something else. As the first officer approached the scene, he was met with a disturbing sight. A lifeless body on the ground, and another person wounded and clutching their head in pain. The injured person was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound, leaving the police with many unanswered questions. Amidst the chaos, the police were wanted to speak with one woman in particular, Candy Hall, who was present at the crime scene. Candy identified the man in the hospital as her husband Rob, and the deceased man as her boss Emmett. Emmett had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Shortly after Emmett's body was discovered in the Walgreens parking lot, his wife Ashley received a knock on her door. When she answered, police officers broke the devastating news to her. Her husband Emmett was dead, a victim of a shooting. Ashley was shocked and distraught, unable to fathom what had led to this tragic event. The police then asked Ashley if she was familiar with Rob and Candy Hall. Ashley revealed that she knew Candy as Emmett's assistant, but she had long suspected that the two were having an affair. The police brought Candy in for questioning at the station, determined to piece together the events leading up to Emmett's murder and Rob's shooting. During the interrogation, Candy denied having a romantic relationship with her boss Emmett, and she vehemently rejected any suggestion of intimate relations. According to Candy, she had driven to Walgreens that night solely to pick up a prescription. Candy and Emmett met by chance in a store and decided to take a drive in Emmett's car. During the drive, Candy's phone rang. It was her estranged husband Rob. Candy told Rob she was with Emmett, which sparked Rob's jealousy and led to him making a violent threat against Emmett. After the phone call, Candy and Emmett stopped at a gas station and eventually arrived at Walgreens. When they got out of the car, saw Rob waiting for them, visibly angry. The situation escalated into a heated argument and physical fight between Rob and Emmett. Amidst the chaos, Candy heard 3 loud gunshots and turned to see both men on the ground. She saw a gun lying nearby, picked it up and threw it away. When questioned by detectives, Candy claimed she didn't know who fired the first shots. Rob, who suffered a superficial gunshot wound to the head, was treated at the hospital and then interviewed by detectives. He told them that the gun found at the scene was his, and that it fell out of his pocket during the fight with Emmett at Walgreens. According to Rob, Emmett dove for the gun, and they struggled over it, resulting in Emmett shooting him in the head. Rob claimed he didn't know who shot Emmett during the struggle. The detectives weren't surprised that Rob didn't remember much due to his head wound from the gunshot. However, they did wonder if Emmett had fired the first shot, considering he ended up dead. To get to the bottom of the incident, which occurred in the Walgreens parking lot, the detectives checked the security footage. Upon reviewing the footage, they saw Rob Hall arrive at the parking lot at 9:55 p.m. 1 minute later, he entered the Walgreens store, rushing through each aisle as if searching for someone. The footage then showed Rob leaving the store at 10:06 p.m. and parking his car beside the candy section, where he waited for several minutes. 10 minutes after the shooting, Emmett's truck appeared on security footage as it pulled into the parking lot, but the shooting itself wasn't caught on camera. Although Candy, Emmett's assistant, initially denied having a romantic relationship with her boss, coworkers whispered that they were more than just colleagues. In fact, coworkers often saw Candy and Rob spending time together in Rob's office, with the door closed. Just 3 weeks after she started her job, detectives made a surprising discovery. Emmett had accompanied Candy to the public defender's office to discuss divorcing Rob. During their investigation, crime scene investigators searched Emmett's vehicle and found steroids in the glove compartment. This didn't surprise many of Emmett's loved ones, as he was obsessed with bodybuilding and had been acting strangely, leading them to suspect he was using steroids. When Candy gave her statement to the detectives, she described a distinctive pattern of gunshots that suggested Rob had shot and killed Emmett twice before turning the gun on himself. This evidence was enough for the detectives to obtain an arrest warrant for Rob Hall, charging him with first-degree murder. Rob was arrested and charged with Emmett's murder. The consequences of Rob's actions were severe. If convicted, he faced life in prison without parole or the death penalty. As the trial approached, Ashley, Emmett's wife, hoped it would bring her some closure. She believed that understanding her husband's infidelity and death would help her heal. Prosecutors argued that Rob was angry at Emmett for having an affair with Candy and blamed Emmett for ruining his marriage. According to the prosecution, Rob shot Emmett and then killed himself. However, Rob's defense team told a different story. They claimed Emmett was the aggressor on the night he died, and that he had a history of steroid abuse. They alleged that during the altercation, Emmett grabbed Rob's gun and shot Rob before Rob regained possession and killed Emmett in self-defense. One of the key witnesses in Rob's trial was his wife Candy. Her testimony differed slightly from her initial statement to the police. Instead of hearing 2 rapid gunshots followed by another, she claimed to have heard a pop followed by 2 more rapid pops. This new version of events supported the defense's argument that Emmett shot Rob first. To prove Rob was the shooter, prosecutors presented forensic evidence that the type of weapon used in the parking lot shooting left significant gunshot residue, GSR, after firing. Investigators tested Rob and Emmett for GSR and found that Rob's left palm had 32 particles. His right palm had 23, while Emmett had only 1 particle on his left hand and none on his right. The forensic evidence proved that Rob was the one who fired the gun 3 times, and Emmett never possessed the weapon. After careful consideration, the jury found Rob Hall not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder, which means the murder was not premeditated. The judge sentenced Rob to 30 years in prison. Rob will be eligible for parole in 2028, when he is 58 years old. Despite the conviction, Rob maintains his innocence and appealed his conviction in 2021. But the Idaho Supreme Court denied him a retrial. 2 months after Emmett's murder, Candy Hall was arrested and charged with embezzlement for allegedly stealing money from her previous employer. This charge was unrelated to Emmett's murder. Candy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to imprisonment, released on parole in 2014, and remains on probation until 2026. In an interview, Candy expressed deep feelings of guilt over the incident, mainly due to its impact on her relationships with her children. She hopes to prove to them that it was a regrettable mistake. Ashley struggled to come to terms with her husband's murder by his lover's husband. In a 2015 interview, she faced Candy Hall for the first time. Despite her emotional pain, Ashley decided to move on and create a new life. She moved out of town with their 5 children, who gradually adjusted to the change and found joy again. Ashley eventually remarried, had 2 more children, and now blogs for victims of trauma. Nestled along the shoreline of New York, Ocean Harbor Drive is a picturesque coastal avenue that exudes an air of tranquility and luxury. Lined with elegant waterfront homes and upscale properties, is a coveted residential neighborhood that attracts the affluent and those seeking a serene coastal lifestyle. However, the allure of Ocean Harbor Drive in New York can sometimes conceal the shadows that lurk beneath its beauty. The haunting and tragic case of Susan Igen and her son, Richard, serves as a stark reminder that even in idyllic settings, darkness can find its way. Susan K. Igen, born in 1942, faced a tumultuous journey through life. As her marriage with Al Igen crumbled, she mustered the strength to take a bold step forward and separate from her husband. She began to live independently and rebuild her life from scratch alongside her 3 children, Richard, Karen, and Michael. Her new beginning commenced at 3412 Ocean Harbor Drive in Long Island, New York, where she embraced hope for a brighter future. Amidst her peaceful surroundings, she gradually assimilated into the community, forming connections with her neighbors. Her efforts to start afresh seemed promising, and visitors from the neighborhood occasionally graced her home, giving her a sense of belonging. Little did she realize that the semblance of a normal life she had worked hard to establish was soon to be brutally shattered. It was February 26, 1984, and the innocence of a typical Sunday was soon to be turned into a nightmare for 11-year-old Michael Igen as he returned home from a neighborhood hockey game. Instead of the warmth of his mother's presence, he was met with a chilling and gruesome scene. Susan Igen, his mother, lay lifeless in the hallway, her body savagely beaten and strangled, an unimaginable sight that would haunt the young boy for years to come. He immediately ran to a neighbor's house begging for help. Upon receiving the distress call from Susan's downstairs neighbor, whose name was not made public, the Nassau County Police Department arrived at the scene. As they entered the house, their eyes were met with the lifeless body of Susan. Lying in the second-floor hallway, right in front of the master bedroom, the police knew from their first glance that she had been a victim of assault. However, the darkest revelations were yet to come as the officers ventured into the master bedroom. When the police stepped inside the bedroom, they found Susan's 17-year-old son, Richard, also dead. After ensuring the area was secure, Officers Otto Kohlmeyer and Ed Carter of the Nassau County Police Department requested backup. Detective Herb Daub arrived at the crime scene and commenced a comprehensive investigation of the crime scene. The forensic team recovered a white bed sheet stained with blood found in close proximity to Susan's body. Additionally, they collected hair strands from the bandana that had been used to strangle her. Bodily fluids were also found inside the home and collected as evidence. The bedroom exhibited signs of being ransacked, resembling a typical scene from a botched robbery. Dresser drawers were left open and the contents of a pocketbook were scattered across the bed. During the crime scene investigation, the forensic team discovered 2 latent fingerprints. The first one was lifted from a bank receipt, found amidst the scattered items on the bed, and the second one was recovered from the plastic bag used to suffocate Richard Igen, which was still covering his face. Subsequently, the collective evidence was sent to the laboratory for further analysis and processing. With this theory in mind, investigators speculated that Richard had unexpectedly arrived home during the attack on his mother. Having witnessed the crime, he was murdered to prevent him from talking. While the initial evidence seemed to support this theory, actually proving it would be another challenging task. In 1984, the field of forensic analysis lacked the advanced and sophisticated techniques available today. This limitation made it significantly more challenging to obtain definitive and conclusive results from the collected evidence. Investigators had to rely on conventional methods and technologies, which might not have provided as precise and detailed information as modern forensic techniques do. In August 1984, Detective Charlie Costello from the Fingerprint Division of the Crime Lab was performing tests on the latent fingerprints that were collected from the bag used to suffocate Richard and another from the bankruptcy collected from Susan's purse. Believing that these fingerprints might belong to the intruder, Costello ran the prints through the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFIS. However, despite his efforts, he was unable to find a match in the system, since the murderer had no previous criminal records on file. The detectives decided to broaden their search by collecting fingerprints from individuals in the local area with a history or background in burglary. The idea was to compare these fingerprints with the ones found at the crime scene, hoping to identify a potential match or lead that could help them narrow down their suspect list. This method, though time-consuming, aimed to cast a wider net in their investigation and increase the chances of finding a connection to the perpetrator. Despite their diligent efforts and months of testing numerous fingerprint samples from potential suspects, the investigators were unable to match the fingerprints found at the crime scene. As time passed, they brought in as many samples as possible, but none of them yielded any results. Sadly, after nearly a year of exhaustive investigation, they had run out of new fingerprints to test, and without any viable suspects or leads, the case eventually went cold. After 18 years, on January 22, 2002, Detective Charlie Costello decided to try his luck once more and ran another fingerprint through AFIS, hoping for a breakthrough. To his immense relief, this time he obtained a positive result. Costello successfully matched the fingerprint found on the evidence to a fingerprint submitted on a school bus driver application. The applicant's name was Louis Talisi. Upon discovering this match to Louis Talisi, investigators learned that he was 42 years old at the time of the crime and had a history of drug possession. With Louis Talisi identified as the prime suspect, the cold case detectives exercised caution and patience, deciding to gather more concrete evidence before making an arrest. In February 2002, DNA Analysis McCarthy employed an ultraviolet beam to detect bodily fluid stains on the evidence that were collected from the crime scene, which were otherwise invisible to the human eye. Successfully collecting the fluid, McCarthy extracted a partial DNA profile from it. Armed with his partial DNA profile, the detectives knew they were getting closer to solving this case definitively. The only missing piece now was a sample of Louis Talisi's DNA to compare with the extracted profile and confirm the match. It was finally time for them to find Louis Talisi. On May 10, 2002, the task of securing Louis Talisi's DNA fell to Detective Tony Graziano, a skilled and well-organized undercover agent from the Nassau County Police Department. His mission was to discreetly obtain a covert DNA sample from the suspect without alerting Talisi to the ongoing investigation. At 11 a.m. on May 10, 2002, Detectives Graziano and Sergeant Guido initiated their operation by conducting a walkthrough of Louis Talisi's residence. The purpose of this walkthrough was to familiarize themselves with the layout of the house and gather any potential information that might be useful during their interaction with Talisi. Following the walkthrough, Detective Graziano took the lead in establishing a rapport with Talisi. Building rapport is a crucial skill in undercover work, as it helps gain the trust and confidence of the suspect. Over the course of their interaction, Graziano engaged Talisi in casual conversation, discussing various topics to create a comfortable and friendly atmosphere. The detectives knew that they had to approach the situation delicately, ensuring that Talisi remained unaware of their true purpose. Their goal was to gain Talisi's trust enough to obtain a covert DNA sample without raising any suspicion. As Detective Graziano and Sergeant Guido continued their walkthrough of Talisi's home, they maintained a casual atmosphere, with Talisi smoking a cigarette during the conversation. Subsequently, they stepped outside onto the street, where Talisi eventually discarded the cigarette butt. Without suspecting anything amiss, their orchestrated plan was progressing as intended. After Talisi left the area, Sergeant Guido discreetly collected the discarded cigarette butt. Detective Graziano and Guido wasted no time and immediately made their way to the crime lab. In the crime lab, the analysis carefully isolated the saliva and epithelial cells from the filter of the cigarette butt. The DNA present in the sample was extracted and purified, ensuring the removal of any potential contaminants. With the DNA profile from the cigarette butt now prepared, it was time to compare it to the previously extracted partial DNA profile obtained from the crime scene evidence. As expected, the moment of truth arrived and the comparison revealed an undeniable match between the two DNA samples. The results confirmed that Louis Talisi was indeed the killer, linking him conclusively to the crime scene and the murders of Susan and Richard Igen. After building a solid case with concrete evidence against him, Louis Talisi was finally arrested on June 5, 2002. Law enforcement officers took him downtown for questioning. In the Nassau County interviewing room, Louis Talisi was confronted with the evidence collected by the detectives, including the crucial fluid sample that linked him to the crime scene. Talisi, displaying his cunning nature, quickly latched on to a potential defense strategy. He acknowledged knowing Susan and cunningly claimed that he had a physical relationship with her. According to his statement, this explained the presence of his bodily fluid inside Susan's home, suggesting that it was not related to the murders. Talisi further stated that at the time of the murders he lived in Brooklyn and had been introduced to the Igens by friends who lived next door to them. Subsequently, Talisi had met the Igens on several occasions in the past. However, the detectives asserted that on the day of the murder, he was not an invited guest. The cold case detectives didn't believe Talisi's statement, but they knew the potential complication Talisi's statement might introduce during the court proceedings. They understood that handling it with precision was crucial. Nonetheless, they held one last decisive piece of evidence. A trump card that, if presented skillfully, would leave Talisi with no escape route. On July 3, 2002, DNA analysis Terry Melton took possession of 2 strands of hair that were recovered from the bandana used to strangle Susan Igen. Melton then extracted a DNA profile from the hair samples. The crucial step was to compare this newly obtained DNA profile with Louis Talisi's existing DNA profile. And with DNA analysis of the hair strands from the bandana matching Louis Talisi's DNA profile, the final piece of the puzzle was completed for the cold case detectives. After the completion of the investigation and the compilation of a strong case against Louis Talisi, the Igen double murder case was handed over to the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. The District Attorney's team reviewed the evidence and prepared for the trial. The case was put on the court docket and trial proceedings began. Assistant DA Robert Biancovilla painted a picture of death to lazy fashion for Susan and Richard Igen. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Louis Talisi remained unwilling to confess to the murders. His defense attorney Michael Washower put forth a defense strategy to create reasonable doubt in the jury's minds. Washer claimed that Talisi was attempting a family gathering on the day of the murders, suggesting an alibi to counter the prosecution's case. In an effort to cast doubt on Talisi's involvement, Washer also proposed the possibility that other individuals who knew the Igens may have been responsible for the crimes. During the trial, Louis Talisi took the opportunity to briefly speak in court. He expressed his deepest condolences to the families of Susan and Richard Igen, acknowledging the profound loss they had suffered. However, he also maintained his stance, asserting that he was innocent of the crimes he was accused of committing. Michael Igen, Susan's son, addressed the court and shared a haunting memory that had stayed with him since the murders. He recounted an incident that occurred 4 years after the tragic events when he and his teenage friend found themselves on a boat with Louis Talisi. Michael revealed that Talisi's cousin lived next door to him, leading to this unexpected encounter. According to Michael's testimony, Talisi appeared to be in a state of distress, consuming alcohol and smoking while talking at length about himself and his perceived misery in life. With poster-sized photos of his beloved mother and brother displayed behind him in the courtroom, Michael continued to address the jury. He shared how deeply he had been affected by the defense's portrayal of his mother during the trial. Louis Talisi's defense attorney had attempted to create reasonable doubt by suggesting alternative scenarios and other potential suspects. In doing so, they had painted an unflattering and distorted picture of Susan Igen. In a powerful and emotional courtroom scene, 3 other relatives of the victim also addressed the court during the sentencing phase of the trial. Al Igen, Susan's former husband and Richard's father, turned toward Louis Talisi and directly expressed the magnitude of the devastation caused by his actions. He described the murders as the most horrific crime imaginable, one that had torn apart a family. Al Igen acknowledged that no sentence could ever fully compensate for the loss they had endured. Still, he urged the judge to impose the maximum penalty upon the convicted murderer. His words carried the weight of a grieving father seeking justice for his beloved ex-wife and son. Similarly, Eugene K., Susan's brother, tearfully addressed the judge, struggling to find words to convey the deep pain inflicted by Talisi's callous actions. Through tears and deep breaths, he asked the judge to consider the profound cruelty and heartlessness displayed by the defendant as they determined the appropriate sentence. In an emotionally charged moment during the sentencing, Karen Igen, the daughter and sister of Susan and Richard, was unable to attend in person. Instead, her best friend, Wendy Woods, read a heartfelt statement on her behalf. This statement conveyed the profound impact that the murders had on Karen's life, revealing that she had effectively lost her childhood on the day of the tragic events. Karen's statement expressed her bewilderment and disbelief that someone capable of committing such heinous crimes could still maintain their innocence. During their trial, Assistant District Attorney Robert Biancavilla presented a compelling case against Louis Talisi. He charged that Talisi had a specific intent to rob the Igens in order to support his cocaine habit. According to the prosecution's theory, Talisi broke into the Igens with the intent to steal valuable items and money. However, the burglary took a horrifying turn when he encountered Susan Igen inside the house. In the course of the robbery, Talisi assaulted and ultimately murdered Susan in a brutal act of violence. The situation escalated further when Richard Igen unexpectedly entered the home during the burglary. The prosecution contended that fearing his crime would be exposed and unwilling to leave behind any witnesses, Talisi made the chilling decision to kill Richard as well. With the overwhelming evidence gathered by the cold case detectives and the prosecutor's compelling case during the trial, Louis Talisi had no viable defense. The evidence pointed unequivocally towards his involvement in the brutal crimes, leaving him with no way out of the situation. Talisi was finally charged with second-degree murder, kidnapping, burglary, and aggravated assault. During the sentencing hearing on June 2, 2004, Michael Igen, the son and brother of the victims, addressed the court once again. In an emotional statement, he expressed the profound impact that the murders had on his life. Michael shared that the loss of his home, his mother, and his brother were among the many things stolen from him by Talisi. In recognition of the devastating losses suffered by the Igen family, the heinous nature of the crimes, Nassau County Court Judge Joseph Calabrese handed down the sentence to Louis Talisi. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive 25 years to life prison terms for the 1984 murders of Susan and Richard Igen, the Oceanside mother and son. Judge Joseph Calabrese made it clear to Talisi that he saw no reason to show any leniency or mercy towards him. The judge emphasized that the method by which Talisi had murdered his victims was deliberate and intended to cause maximum pain and suffering. Furthermore, Calabrese pointed out that Talisi had demonstrated no remorse for his actions throughout the entire trial process. Michael Igen, after the sentencing, spoke to reporters and expressed his thoughts on Louis Talisi's continued insistence on his innocence. He stated that Talisi's refusal to admit guilt was consistent with a pattern of behavior in his life. Michael implied that his behavior might be indicative of Talisi's unwillingness to take responsibility for his actions. With the knowledge that Talisi would be behind bars for at least 50 years due to consecutive life sentences, Michael acknowledged that a certain portion of his mind found ease in knowing that the perpetrator would face the consequences of his crimes for a significant portion of his life. Michael was ready to begin the process of moving beyond the tragedy that had haunted them for so many years. In 2005, a year after being sentenced for the murders of Susan and Richard Igen, Louis Talisi passed away while serving his prison sentence. His death marked the end of his life behind bars, cutting short this sentence imposed upon him by the court. So what are your thoughts on this case? Do you think the Igen family finally found peace with Talisi's death after just 1 year of being behind bars? The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with a bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand, it happens such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while, her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time, she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009, he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash cannon and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands. And upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase, on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment, an envelope with Misty's name on it, and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding bases of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing. But the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, They discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not connected to the cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? Police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome, and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining its bank card details, and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one work day, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would dart reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was. But it did not upset him at all, because by such an act, he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body. But an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Mrs. Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield during the interview explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. "We will never forgive him for what he did to our family," said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. "I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers," added her stepfather, Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and the uncontrollable anger, can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. Knoxville is the county seat of Knox County, Tennessee, also known as Marble City. With a population of just under 200,000, Knoxville has an easy southern suburban atmosphere with tight-knit communities. But despite its small-town vibe, Knoxville has a higher crime rate than most American cities of the same size. For every 100,000 citizens, the crime rate is 379.6. And yet, Knoxville is a charming place to live, with its museums and parks. Being a university town gives it this perfect blend of age and youth, old and new, vibrant and rustic. And this is where our story takes us. Ranella Bernadine Large, later known as Ranella Dosset Leith, was born on October 25, 1948 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Her father, Dewey Ernest Large, was a nuclear scientist, and her mother was Annie Large, a school teacher. Ranella was raised in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where she attended Oak Ridge High School and graduated in 1966. Ranella grew up in a safe and isolated community designed to accommodate workers at the nuclear power station where her father worked. Like every tight-knit community, the residents of Oak Ridge knew one another well and didn't deal with many outsiders. Crime was minimal and children could play outside without adult supervision or fear. The community was also very conservative and dominantly white. Although prohibition, a set of laws that criminalized the production and consumption of alcohol in the U.S., ended in 1933, alcohol consumption was strictly forbidden in the county where Ranella grew up. As a young girl, Ranella was very bright. She excelled academically, always at the top of her class and even taking extra classes when possible. Her safe and solid upbringing made her confident in her abilities and helped her excel in school. After high school, Ranella attended East Tennessee State University, Knoxville, where she trained to become a nurse. While in college, she met an ambitious and intelligent business student who wanted to attend law school after college and become a lawyer. Edward Dosset, also known as Ed by his friends and family, was a soft-spoken man with a friendly but handsome face. When he met the beautiful, dark-haired Ranella, it was love at first sight. Before long, he had asked for Ranella's hand in marriage, and she said yes. In 1970, Ranella and Ed got married and moved to Knoxville, just outside Ranella's hometown. Ed's family had a dilapidated but large farm in Knoxville with the help of an architect, and rebuilt the farm so he and Ranella could settle down and start their own family. After Ranella graduated from college, she started working as a nurse in a hospital in Knoxville. By 1972, had completed law school and began a career as a proud country lawyer. In 1982, the Attorney General for Knox County retired, and Ed decided to run for the office. Ed brought his usual determination and enthusiasm into the campaign, and his efforts were rewarded when he got elected into the Attorney General's office. By 1978, Ranella gave birth to the first child, Maggie Dosset. And on July 18, 1983, their second child was born, a boy named Eddie. In 1985, Ranella gave birth to the couple's third child, a beautiful baby girl named Kate. When Ed served as the Attorney General, he had a secretary named Kay. Kay and her husband Steve were good friends of the Dossets, and both couples often hung out together. But with the arrival of their child, increased pressure from Ed's job and Kay's first pregnancy, which made her resign from her secretary job, the four of them began to spend less time with each other, or at least two of them did. The other two, and his former secretary Kay, continued seeing each other because they were having a secret affair. As an elected public servant in a conservative county, having an affair was perhaps one of the worst things Ed could do to ruin his career. But Kay, unhappy in her marriage with Steve, was in love with Ed. And as for Ed, one of the few things keeping him married to his wife was that leaving her would hurt his political ambitions. He was not exactly experiencing marital bliss. Almost everyone who knew Ranella and Ed knew that Ranella was not the easiest person to be with. She was bossy and controlling with a mean attitude that made everyone around her keep a distance from her. They knew not to mess with her. Ranella and Ed, who were once so in love with each other, started to have marital problems because of Ranella's controlling attitude. To make matters worse, Ed soon began to suffer from chronic stomach pain. Once, at a local authority meeting, someone noticed Ed grimacing in pain and asked him if he was okay. Ed's reply was strange. He said that he had the meanest wife in the world who was trying to kill him. By October 1991, Ed's stomach pain had gotten so bad that he was admitted to the hospital. Shockingly, after a series of tests, the doctors informed him that there was a cancerous tumor in his small intestine and liver, which had spread to other organs in his abdomen as well. Ranella took this news in stride, but for some reason she felt the need to hide Ed's illness from the rest of the world. Ed's diagnosis meant that he was dying already, and if word got out, he would have to resign from his job, losing his income. Perhaps Ranella felt that by hiding the illness, could continue working and beat the cancer somehow. But Ed only got worse. In March 1992, Ed's cousin Elizabeth traveled 500 miles from Illinois to come and see him. Ed, desperate to have his family around him, had written to her. When Elizabeth arrived at the Dosset home, she was shocked at the welcome, or lack of it, that she got from Ranella. Ranella bluntly refused to let her see Ed, and didn't even allow her to enter the house. Upset, Elizabeth realized that there was nothing she could do, so she went back home. Later, she would receive a letter from Ranella, telling her that Ed was in such bad shape that he could not receive visitors. Gradually, Ed gained some energy that allowed him to return to work. Although in constant pain, he approached his illness with his usual determination. Despite his best efforts, Ed's condition worsened and he had to leave work again, this time for good. For the rest of his life, Ed remained bedridden, constantly pumped full of morphine to ease his suffering. On July 9, 1992, police raced to the Dosset residence after receiving a chilling call from a local market director. According to the director, Ranella Leith was claiming to have found her husband, Ed, lying on the floor outside, unconscious. When they arrived at the scene, they met a hysteric Ranella hovering around Ed, who was unconscious. She claimed she had found him there after he insisted on going down to see the cattle. She did not mention his terminal sickness. Rather, she told the operator she believed their cattle had trampled on him. From all indications, the only thing investigators could make of the scene was that it appeared to be an accident. But when police interviewed Ranella later, her story wasn't quite straight. According to her, Ed had suddenly insisted he go down to see the cattle. When he did not return inside on time, she went back to check on him and found him lying on the ground. She believed something must have set the cattle off because they were scrambling out of their pen. Even though she did not find a pulse when she checked for one, she immediately began CPR on him. Ranella then claimed that she tried to call 911 on her cell phone but didn't get any response, so she ran back into the house to call the local hospital, but realized she couldn't remember the number. Police found this strange because Ranella had worked at the same hospital for years as the director of nursing, but since she had not been working for quite some time, they believed it might be possible that she had forgotten the number. She then called the director of a local market and asked him to call an ambulance. An ambulance did arrive soon after, so Ranella's story seemed accurate. When the ambulance reached the hospital, 44-year-old Ed Dosset was pronounced dead on arrival. The police launched an investigation into his death because they suspected foul play, but they ultimately agreed with Ranella's story and ruled the cause of his death as an agricultural accident. Although police had closed the case, not everyone was convinced that Ranella was telling the truth. People who had seen Ed in the weeks leading up to his death claimed that he was acting very strangely and could barely stay conscious for more than a few minutes at a time. He also found it difficult to walk straight, as if he was constantly intoxicated. It also seemed implausible that Ed's cattle would stampede him without any reason. Then again, autopsy reports showed that Ed had bruises, internal injuries, and hoof prints on his body, suggesting cattle had indeed trampled him. There was also the fact that Ed's life insurance policy had a double indemnity clause, so if he died by accident, his beneficiaries would receive twice the amount than any other cause of death. Since his death was ruled an agricultural accident, Ranella would receive that double amount. On top of all this, Ranella's reputation as a no-nonsense bossy woman made people suspicious of her. She had told police that when she discovered her husband was dead, she was so enraged with the cattle that she grabbed a gun and shot one of them. But when law enforcement examined the cattle, they found none with bullet wounds. And interestingly, they also did not take note of the morphine in Ed's bloodstream, which would have been quite substantial since he was taking heavy doses of it to help with the pain. Despite these inconsistencies in Ranella's story, local law enforcement did not pursue the issue any further. They also considered the possibility that he might have orchestrated the entire thing, just so his wife and kids could have more money when he died, since he knew he didn't have much time left anyway. Ed's funeral was another strike against Ranella, as she decided to bury him on the farm, rather than where his family said Ed had wanted to be buried. During the funeral, Ranella appeared too serene for someone who had just lost her husband, and the father of her children. Some even said she was cheerful, moving from guest to guest as though it were a regular party and not a funeral. After Ed's demise, Ranella decided to become a full-time homemaker to spend more time with her kids, but she began to get bored or restless. So she began spending time with her children at a nearby pool owned by a man named Dave Leith. Dave was also Ed's friend and was generally well-liked in the community, was married and had a daughter Cindy, whom he absolutely adored. Apart from being married to people they didn't like and having children, Ranella and Dave had very little in common. While Ranella had a solid upbringing and was well-educated, Dave was a high school dropout with no other qualifications. After dropping out of school at 19, Dave found a job as a barber and eventually opened his own barbershop. He was fond of cars and always spent his free time tinkering with one or watching stock car races. But despite what some might have called his shortcomings, Dave was always certain of one thing. He was very handsome. Dave was not ashamed to spend extra money in effort to look good. He had undergone several plastic surgeries, including a facelift and a tummy tuck, and to an extent his efforts did pay off, because he was considered an attractive man by many. Unfortunately, Dave had an accident that subtracted from his beauty, at least by his standards. One day while chopping wood, he got a splinter in his left eye. To mask this defect, he took to wearing sunglasses to cover his eyes and never looking directly at people when he wasn't wearing the shades. The more time Ranella spent at Dave's swimming pool, the closer they got. Before long, they had begun having an affair. When Dave's wife found out, she immediately filed for divorce. But Dave didn't care. He was head over heels in love with Ranella. Little did he know that his love affair would be the biggest mistake he would ever make. In January 1993, 6 months after Ed died, Ranella married her boyfriend Dave in a tight-knit community like Knoxville. Marrying your husband's friend so soon after his death was scandalous, but the gossip soon died down as Dave and Ranella often walked around town hand in hand, laughing and beaming at each other. They appeared to be genuinely in love with each other, and they were for a while. But just like her previous marriage, Ranella soon began to express her bossy nature with Dave, and this affected Dave quite negatively. For example, Cindy, Dave's only child, once found Dave sitting in his pickup truck, sobbing. When she asked him what the matter was, he said he and Ranella had a fight, but it was nothing to worry about. In 1994, Ed and Rianella's last child, Eddie, died tragically in an accident. 11-year-old Eddie and his sister, 15-year-old Maggie, were driving around in their mother's car. Maggie had a provisional license, which meant that she could only drive when someone else with a proper license was in the car with her. On that fateful day, Maggie was driving unsupervised with Eddie in the passenger seat, when Maggie lost control of the car and hit an oncoming vehicle. Eddie wasn't wearing a seatbelt then, and on impact he was ejected out through the passenger side and died. When police questioned Ranella, she claimed that she had been in the vehicle, although several witnesses asserted she wasn't, but the police took her word for it and did not press charges against her. Maybe if the police had done their jobs, some of the tragedies that occurred in the lives of everyone around Ranella would not have happened, because Ranella was not new to violence. Shortly after Ranella's son, Eddie died. Kay, Eddie's former secretary, sought a divorce from her husband, Steve. During the divorce proceedings, Steve discovered that his second child with Kay was not his child. It was Ed Dosset's child. When Ranella got wind of this, she invited Steve to her house to talk about their partners and the whole situation. During their conversation, Ranella confessed that she knew about the affair, had decided not to say anything about it. After their little chat, Steve went back home. The following day, Ranella invited Steve over again, claiming she had found papers that proved both of Kay's children belonged to Ed, not Steve. Naturally, Steve was curious, so when Ranella asked him to come over to see the documents, he did not hesitate. Upon getting to the Dosset farm, Ranella led Steve to a barn where she claimed she had found the documents. When they entered the barn, she pointed him to a bucket sitting in the corner. Ranella began firing at him with a revolver she was now holding, but she missed the first few shots. Steve managed to escape the farm and immediately reported to the police. But Ranella, anticipating this, had called the police first. In a panicked voice, she narrated how Steve had come to her house with a gun, threatening to kill her. She knew this would make the police restrict Steve from seeing his children, which had been her plan all along. She wanted to take custody of the boy that Kate and Ed had together, but her story did not make sense, so she was charged with attempted murder and granted bail for $10,000. Her attorney tried unsuccessfully to get the charges dropped, but in January 1996, a grand jury indicted her. 2 weeks before she was set to face trial for attempted murder, Ranella went for a plea bargain. Pleading guilty to assault, in exchange, the attempted murder charge was dropped and wiped from her record, and she got 6 years of probation and 100 days of community service. Meanwhile, Ranella continued to exercise more and more control over Dave. Dave changed his will and made Ranella the sole beneficiary of his estate after his death. Not even his beloved daughter Cindy or her son Dave's grandson would get a dime after he had passed away. He also ensured his mother's home would pass to Ranella after she died. In January of 2000, Dave began to suffer from some medical conditions, including hallucinations, high cholesterol, and even had a stroke once. Ranella immediately took charge of everything, forbidding everyone from seeing Dave. Not even his daughter Cindy was allowed to see him. However, Dave recovered from his illness and was discharged from the hospital, but he was forced to retire from his barbershop, as he could not leave home for long periods. Alongside his many illnesses, Dave began to suffer from short-term memory loss and early-onset dementia. During one of his visits to a neurologist, he mentioned that he felt his wife was trying to kill him. He could faintly remember her pressing a pillow to his face. It sounded eerily similar to what Ed had said about his wife just a few months before he passed away, but his neurologist brushed it aside as one of his hallucinations. Meanwhile, Dave's mother was also diagnosed with ovarian cancer and had to be admitted to the hospital. On March 13, 2003, Ranella visited Dave's mother in the hospital. While there, she suddenly called Cindy asking if she had seen Dave. Ranella said she had left Dave's food on a bedside table, and she was worried he might have gone out without eating. Up until this point, Ranella had forbidden Cindy from seeing Dave, so the call seemed strange, but Cindy said she had not seen him. Ranella rushed home, worried that something might have happened to Dave. When she opened the bedroom door, she found Dave lying in bed, his food untouched. He had a bullet wound on the left side of his head, and there was no pulse. He was dead. When police arrived at the house, they immediately suspected foul play. Ranella had informed them that Dave tragically took his own life, but given his deep affection for his daughter and grandchild, he simply did not fit the profile for someone who would end their life so abruptly. Just a day before his body was discovered, Dave had offered to help a friend with some repairs. He seemed in good spirits, even though he was in pain from his illness. As investigators interviewed Dave's family members, they found another reason to doubt Ranella's suicide story. Dave was afraid of guns. Even as a child, when his father took him hunting, he would refuse to use the gun to shoot any animal. He had never owned a gun as an adult. Also, crime scene investigators discovered that 3 shots had been fired from the gun. The first one missed. The second one was the fatal shot, and the third also missed. The shots had been fired from Dave's left side, meaning he would have used his left hand. But not only was Dave right-handed, he was also completely blind in his left eye due to the splinter incident. So logically, he would not have used his left hand. Based on all this, the police determined that Dave did not take his own life. But if he was murdered, who did it? Without any further evidence, the case went cold. Much to Dave's family's displeasure, Ranella had Dave's body cremated. Cindy was devastated about her father's death. When she was invited to his will reading and she found out that he had not left anything to her and her son, she became livid. She accused the police of mishandling the case and pressed them to look deeper into it. She wrote to the DA's office severally, asking them to take another look at the case. The case went unsolved for almost 3 years, and she only grew more desperate to see justice served. By 2006, when it seemed like she would not get what she wanted, she hired private investigators and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Ranella. Cindy wasn't asking for money. She only wanted Ranella to forfeit all the inheritance she got from Dave if Cindy won the case. The lawsuit made law enforcement look closer at not just Dave's death, but also Ed's. Upon further investigation, they discovered that the autopsy conducted on Ed Dosset's body was at the best not credible. Randall Bedigo, the medical examiner who had carried out the autopsy, had a long history of substance abuse, which meant that he was likely under the influence when he conducted Ed's autopsy. Otherwise, he might have noticed and mentioned that the morphine in his system, which according to the new medical report, was so extraordinarily high, it's unlikely that any human could function in an ambulatory manner or continue to live. In 2006, Ranella was charged with administering an overdose of morphine. It turned out that Ed had died from a morphine overdose, not being trampled by cattle. Investigators also discovered that before Dave's death, she had secretly gone to a funeral home to make an upfront payment for Dave's cremation. With this new information, the police were ready to make their next move. In November 2008, Ranella was charged with the first-degree murder of Dave Leith. Although she was arrested, police placed her bond at a ridiculously low $5,000. Yet there was no court date for her trial. In September 2007, Ranella entered a not guilty plea to the charge of Dave's murder, but she would not go on trial until March 2009. But the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial. It did not matter that of the 12 jurors, only one voted for not guilty, while the others believed she was guilty. She would go on trial again in 2010. This time, ballistic experts testified that the bullet that had killed Dave was fired from 12 to 14 inches away, which was too wide a distance for someone who allegedly committed suicide. Also, no fingerprints were found on the gun, suggesting that whoever fired the gun had the opportunity to wipe it. At the time of his death, Dave had up to 4 different medications in his system that would have made it impossible for him to sit up on his own, let alone hold a gun and fire it. The prosecution maintained that Ranella had killed Dave. She set it up to look like a suicide, then went to the hospital to visit his mother, where she was sure CCTV would provide her with a solid alibi. On January 25, 2010, the jury returned with a verdict after deliberating for 2 days. They found Ranella Leith guilty of first-degree murder of Dave Leith, and she was given a life sentence. The prosecution dropped all charges related to Ed's case afterward. In early 2011, A court ruled that Dave's last will was invalid because his illness implied that he was not of sound body and mind. Ranella had to give up half of everything she had inherited under the will. Rianella's lawyers tried to appeal the case, but they were unsuccessful. They tried again in 2013, but it was denied. By 2015, Rianella's new defense team argued that Dave's illnesses made him susceptible to depression and mood swings, which could have made him so depressed that he would take his own life. Also, they argued that the judge in the previous trial had been under the influence of drugs because of his addiction to narcotics. In January 2017, Rianella went on trial for the third time. This time, the defense established the prosecution's case was circumstantial at best, and that there was every likelihood that Dave had taken his own life. Rianella was acquitted. We may never know why, but although Rianella Leith was dragged to the judicial system several times, she always came out on top, unscathed, and her victims were left to nurse their wounds privately. As long as she has lived in the quiet little community in Knoxville, nobody dares to question her or cross paths with her. Now, once again, Rainella Leith is free to resume her normal life as a mistress of a prosperous farm. Ed's family members will never know the true cause of his death. Cindy Leith may never get the justice she desperately needs for her father. As for the questions, we might never get answers. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.